G'day everyone, I am the Thorough Tank, and this is a quick reference guide to the Arcway dungeon on Mythic Keystone difficulty. Tanking is a role that requires you to know a lot about your dungeon and what you're up against, and this guide is designed to arm you with everything you'll need to know to tank for a group of strangers who will expect you to know the ins and the outs. This is not designed to be a guide to the basics of the dungeon, but rather something to help you tank for a keystone difficulty. Things like what trash to pull and what trash to skip, different boss mechanics that you might need to watch out for, and important trash mechanics that your group will need to be aware of. Coming up at the start here, we're going to do a trick that involves zoning out of the dungeon to reset some enemies. Start off with these two slime adds. Once they die, they'll split into smaller adds, and when they split, this is when you want to go run forwards and grab the next pack of slimes as well, and then zone out. There's three reasons for this zoning out strategy to be effective. Firstly, it despawns the smaller adds that split from the purple ones when you kill them. Secondly, dealing with large numbers of mobs is quite difficult on some affix combos. For example, necrotic, bolstering, explosive, volcanic, those types of affixes can be made easier by not having to deal with a large pool like this. And lastly, pulling the group in front of you despawns the two withered mobs that are normally with them, which allows you to walk around the edge of the room, hug the wall, and skip that pack in the middle completely. It's an annoying pack to kill, and it saves you quite a bit of time not to have to kill it. As you might know if you've run this dungeon a few times, when you start Arcway, there is a 50-50 chance on whether you'll be going to the left through the demon wing first, or to the right through the arcane spider wing first. Not too much changes between the sides, it just affects which pulls you do first. It affects your boss order, and some of the pulls you'll be approaching from a different direction. This video will be using the right hand path. At the end I'll go back and show you what the left hand path looks like and how to pull that differently, but apart from that I'll just note anywhere where the direction you're approaching the trash actually makes a difference. Let's get back into it. First up, we have this green slime here. He's only got one thing that he does that you need to worry about. It's a nature damage dot that he puts on you. It stacks and ticks pretty hard, so if it gets on you and your healer can't remove it, like if they're a priest who can't remove poisons, that kind of thing, then you'll need to make sure to use magic defensive cooldowns. Other than that, he jumps around onto players randomly, so you'll need to be careful of that. If you've got stuns, you can help out your group by stunning him when he's doing that. Next up, running up the stairs to the rats, a second pack will drop down on top of you after you aggro them. Make sure to group them up as quickly as possible and burn them down with some AoE damage. This pack can be pretty dangerous on fortified weeks with some affix combos, so your group should be prepared to burst these down as hard as possible and use as many stuns as you have available to you. These withered mobs up next are repeated several times through the dungeon, so it's important to know what they do. The withered fiends, the smaller ones, will cast two abilities. One is called Unstable Flux, and it's a self buff that increases their haste and makes them immune to interrupt. The second one is called Arcanic Bane, which is a stacking arcane damage increase and can be cast on anybody in the group, including you. So you'll probably end up with quite a few stacks of this. The larger one, the Withered Mana Wraiths, have two dangerous abilities. One is called Siphon Essence, which is a channel that can be interrupted and drains health from the target. The other one is called Collapsing Rift, which targets you and summons pools of damage on the ground. Just need to make sure you're constantly dragging the mobs out of those when they spawn. These Arcane Warp Shades have two dangerous spells that you need to interrupt. Phase Breach, which is an AoE nuke that'll hit the entire party for huge arcane damage, and Arcane Reconstitution, which, if they successfully cast it, will return them to full health. These larger arcane elementals are very easy to deal with too. Dodge the sparks that will spawn periodically, make sure that you interrupt their Arcane Reconstitution as well, and make sure you stand away from the slicer. For the worms in this next room, grab them and pull them back around the corner. Tell your group to wait there if they don't already. That both sides will come at the same time, they're all linked, so just make sure you hit one side and then run all the way back around. Wait for them to come all the way around the corner before you start DPSing them so that they can all die evenly. After they're all dead, grab the Arcane Elemental, deal with it the same way you did the previous one, and then you're going to want to deal with the Spirit that's patrolling in this area. The Spirit doesn't really have much to it, you just need to make sure that you interrupt as much of its casts as possible. So generally speaking, what I like to do when I'm pugging this, when I don't have any communication with my group, is wait until the very end of casts before you do any interrupts, and you'll be able to make sure that you get maximum value, because you don't want to pop yours early and then be left with nobody else doing anything. This next pull works much the same way as the previous pack of mana worms, except that the two sides aren't linked. So if you want to pull both sides, you do have to make sure you hit both the left and the right mobs with something to make them all come to you. Just make sure you let them all come around the corner as best you can before they start DPS. And as always, make sure you control the casts of the warp shades. You don't want to be letting phase breaches go off, and you want to make sure that you don't let any of them heal to full. The last pull before the first boss is a mob you fought before, but fighting two of them does present some unique challenges. Particularly on fortified weeks, the sparks really do hurt quite a lot when they detonate, so you're going to want to make sure that you try and kite away from them when they first spawn, and do watch out for the double slicer. It's very easy to accidentally get clipped by both of them, and that's going to spell danger for you even as the tank. This is a pretty easy boss, but he can hit you pretty hard as he only does magic damage to the tank using his Arcane Blast ability, and tanks generally don't have enough magic mitigation to keep up with the entire amount of damage for the entire fight. So you will need to use some interrupts to help control some of the damage incoming. The other dangerous ability that he has is called Netherlink. It can target you. When the debuff expires, whichever players are linked will leave a gas cloud in the area divided up by their lines. Just need to make sure you make that space as small as possible, so save your movement cooldowns for this ability. Next ability to look out for is Overcharge Mana. He'll teleport to near the crystal in the front of the room and channel an ability. It's a good idea to save your own interrupt for this, because that way you can guarantee that it'll get interrupted and don't have to rely on your DPS. For as long as he channels that ability, he'll gain a stacking damage buff which will be permanent for the rest of the fight. So the quicker you interrupt that, the better. Lastly, after the first time he casts Overcharge Mana, the crystal will start spitting out these Arcane Orbs. Just make sure you weave among them. They don't do all that much damage, but it is more damage on top of what you're already taking from the boss, and on tyrannical weeks it can hit pretty hard. Heading out of the boss, you'll come out of around the corner and get ready to fight the two Warp Shades. Deal with these the same way you did the first pair. Make sure that you don't let any of their casts go off, and you'll get ready for the next room, which is quite challenging if you don't know what you're looking for. If you've run this dungeon quite a bit, then you know that this room in here around the robot is actually really deadly trash. A lot of stuff can go wrong and things can go badly with deaths very quickly. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's all down to one spell. The Nightborn Reclaimer casts a spell called Eye of the Vortex. That spell, if it gets cast, puts a dot on every single member of your group, and it stacks, and it does a huge amount of damage. If you can make sure that spell never gets cast, your group will take practically no damage. At that point, all you have to do is deal with the minor tank damage debuff on you that the spell swords put on you, the clouds of fell gas that the withered fiends put on you, the arcane clouds, and that's really all there is to it. The arcane bolts from the reclaimers will hurt a little bit, but really, if you can make sure Eye of the Vortex does not get cast, you are in a really good position. Course is a completely trivial fight. Start off with tanking him near a haste bubble if one is still up, to make sure your DPS get as much benefit from it as possible. Make sure that you move away from the suppression protocol fields if a DPS puts them near you, and make sure that you move the boss away from any destabilized orbs that spawn. Make sure that you help out with the quarantine if one happens to spawn near you and you can help out, or if you have a movement ability. And make sure you move away from the cleansing force when he channels the large AoE. It's not going to murder you unless the key is very high tyrannical, but it's still worth moving out of the way. After the boss, you're going to want to grab the pack around the corner here. Make sure you keep an eye out for this spirit. It patrols around this area. Make sure that if it's nearby when you're getting ready to pull this pack, that you pull the pack away so the spirit isn't going to get in the way. This pack is the same as the previous ones, it just doesn't have any of the large ones, so you don't have to worry about any of the arcane patches being dropped, but you do still have to try and control their casts as much as possible. In this next section, grab the two large purple fiends around the corner and tank them with the next group. We're speeding through this section a bit because there's nothing new, you're just dealing with these mobs the same way you have previously. After you've killed this pack, you're also going to kill the next one along further in the room, and then you'll head down into the spider room. You can pull all three of these together if you're confident in your group's AoE DPS and AoE silence and other CC abilities, but make sure you do that carefully and inform your group if that's what your plan is. Now in this spider room, there's no reason you can't pull everything all at once. The exception is if it's bursting or explosive. If it's bursting or explosive, it's too big a pull. There'll be too many mobs dying at the same time or too many explosive orbs spawning for this to work. But on any other affix combo, whether it's bolstering, whatever, it works fine. The only caveat is if it's bolstering, make sure they all die at the same time so you don't end up with a mega bolstered spider. The big spiders are a little bit trickier. In some situations you might want to pull them all together if you're confident in your group's stuns. The big spiders will periodically use an ability called Devour, where they'll leap onto somebody and snare them in place. You can interrupt this by stunning them or by knocking them back. So for example, something like a Resto Druid's Ursol's Vortex is really good for this. Stops them from jumping out to people. And with some affix combos, this can be a really dangerous combo. Like for example with Volcanic here, we are actually taking it a bit slower because with too many spiders and not enough stuns, you're going to have a decent chance that somebody gets snared inside a volcano, which can cause some problems. But in general, it is not really too difficult a group of trash. Just take it slowly if you need to. Make sure your group uses their stuns effectively and you shouldn't have a problem. Spider Boss is another really easy one for tanks. Most of her mechanics don't even target you, and the few that do won't kill you even if you do mess them up. First thing to look out for is Blink Strikes. That's where the boss will target some random members of your group and teleport on top of them. You just need to make sure you move away from it if it does teleport on top of you, and don't rush to get back in melee range until after the second Blink Strikes. It does magical damage. If it hits you, you'll take a decent chunk of damage, but like I said, it's not going to kill you. Throughout the fight, the boss will spawn patches of nether venom on the ground. You'll need to make sure that if one of these happens to spawn on or near the boss, that you make sure there's no risk of melee DPS stepping into them, but they don't really affect the fight too much overall. Lastly, throughout the fight, small spider ads will spawn. These are the same ones as the ones you fought immediately before the boss, so they periodically leap on members of your group and root them. You just need to make sure you pull them onto the boss as quickly as possible so DPS can cleave them down, and if you have any stuns or anything, try to use them if they leap on someone. Up next we have the Demon Wing, and the main reason the Demon Wing is so difficult is because of these mobs, the Eridar Chaos Bringers. Now, these cast several different types of spells. They're all really dangerous, and some of them can straight up wipe the group, others can make it extremely difficult to deal with everything else that's going on. So, in descending order, these are the spells that are most important to interrupt from these casters. Up first, Demonic Ascension. If they successfully cast this ability, they'll get a buff on them that will turn them into a demon when they die. These demons have some very powerful abilities which are almost guaranteed to wipe you unless you're doing a very low key, so you need to make sure this is your number one priority to interrupt. Next up, Portal to Argus, which summons a large amount of imps over a period of time. These are controllable, you can deal with them, but they do add an extra element to an already difficult trash pack. Lastly, we have Brand of the Legion and Chaos Bolt. These are the two spells you're probably going to have to let go off more than the others. The Chaos Bolt simply targets you with a big chunk of chaos damage or magical damage. It hits pretty hard, but you can survive it, so this is your lowest priority. Brand of the Legion can be cast on either the melee ads that they're with or the casters themselves. You do want to interrupt this if you've got spare interrupts, but it's not too big a deal if it goes off, and you really want to make sure you prioritize the Demonic Ascension and the Portal. The Wrathguard ads aren't too difficult to deal with. They just leave patches of Fellfire on the ground every time they Fell Strike. Just make sure you move all the mobs out of them. Up next is the Dreadborn Seer. His main dangerous abilities are all magical damage. Prophecies of Doom is the biggest one. It's a short duration cast which hits the entire group for magic damage. You can't really do much about this, just make sure that you keep your own damage intake down as much as possible so your healer can focus on the group. He does also periodically spawn eyes that will shoot everybody, but you can't do anything to dodge these either, so just make sure you're doing the best you possibly can. Now, coming up here, I'm going to show you a cool trick that can only be done if you have a druid in your group. A druid can take off running in stealth and stealth past all of the mobs between here and the next boss, which is up on the raised area you can see to the right. Once he's done that, the rest of your group will run forward and suicide on the trash in front of you. Once the druid is around the corner, he simply casts mass res if he's a healer, or casts individual reses if he's a DPS druid, and from there you can simply continue without having to fight all of this trash up here. Once you get up there, the only pack you're going to have to actually kill is the pack directly in front of the boss. If you don't have a druid, we'll have to do this the hard way. Main thing to look out for in this area is the Forgotten Spirit that patrols around the area. It might not be here, but if it is, make sure you're careful about avoiding it. It can be in a position where it's actually not worth avoiding. You lose more time avoiding than you would by killing it. So keep that in mind. If you think you're going to have to sit there and wait for ages, they do move pretty slow. Make sure that you just take the opportunity to kill it, but avoid it if you can, as they are tricky mobs. The rest of the mobs in this area is nothing you haven't fought before. Just make sure that you deal with everything the same way as you have been up to this point. On the other side here, there's another one of the Dreadborn Seers. Again, be careful in this area, it's pretty tight. You want to make sure to avoid the patrol on the other side that you haven't cleared. So just kill this as best you can, deal with all of its mechanics, and ensure you don't accidentally pull that trash pack. These Wormtongue Scavengers are similar to the Mana Worms in that they won't move if someone's within their line of sight, so just pull them and then take a short step back down the stairs to bring them a bit towards each other. Makes it a little bit easier to stun them and control them. They do hit pretty hard for physical damage on you, just sitting there throwing objects at you. For this next pack up here, you'll want to CC the mob on the right. You can just then walk around the corner to engage the mobs around the corner. In this example, you can see that the spirit's actually in a really bad spot, so I'm actually pulling this mob all the way back. Normally what you do is pull it forwards, front and to the left, but because the spirit was patrolling there, I had to make the choice to tank it here instead. This mob's dangerous ability is called Bladestorm. It'll wind up a short cast and then start spinning around like a top. You need to make sure to stun this before the cast finishes, as even one tick of this can easily kill melee DPS. Head around the corner here and get ready to pull the 2 Wrath Guards that are just inside the doorway here. These patrol back and forth between here and the next pack. Make sure that if they're right next to the next pack, you don't pull them yet. You want to make sure to pull them when they're safely away from the pack. These are the same ones as before to deal with, just make sure you move them out of their fell strikes on the ground. You can repeat the CC process with this pack, just CC the one that's to the furthest of the right and then just walk around it hugging the wall. This is really not that difficult to do as a skip. If you really don't have a CC, you're going to have to kill them. They don't do anything different, so just make sure you get ready to fight them if you need to. This pack is another tricky one as it's got one of 3 different kinds of mobs in it. You know how to deal with all of these, but putting them all together can be a bit tricky. The main thing to do is to not get so worried about the huge damage coming out from the Seer that you forget about the dangerous casts of the Chaos Bringer. So it's a good idea as the tank to keep half an eye on the Chaos Bringer. Your DPS are going to be busy worrying about getting completely destroyed by the other mobs, so it's a good idea for you to just keep your focus on these mobs and interrupt them if need be. This fight is pretty simple. It boils down to tank the hard-hitting boss, pick up the adds that spawn, and dodge anything on the ground that looks like it could hurt you. The most dangerous ability is Shadow Slash. He'll pick a random member of the group, never you, turn towards them and fire out a purple line along the ground. This can hit you, but it doesn't target you, so the main thing you want to do is just make sure that you don't get hit when he's targeting someone else. Make sure throughout the fight that you move out of both the purple swirls that are underneath you as well as the green swirls. Make sure that you don't get hit by either of those as they do a fair amount of damage. Throughout the fight, bat adds will spawn. You make sure you just pick them up as quick as you can. They don't hit very hard, but still your healer doesn't exactly want them beating on them, pushing back their casts. So make sure you pick them up as quick as possible and bring them onto the boss to be cleaved down. Last ability is Wicked Slam. He'll do a short cast, then smash down his axe, knocking you back. Make sure that you don't put your back to any of the patches on the ground that you need to be dodging, so that you don't get knocked back into them. This is more dangerous for your group though, this ability, as it does a huge chunk of damage, so it's not really too dangerous for you. Just make sure you've got your mitigation up, as it does deal physical damage. After that boss fight, head down back the way you came to get to the last boss. If you haven't quite got enough trash percentage, there'll be some down near the boss's room that you can kill, but you should have enough by now. Before we get to the final boss, let's quickly cover off the left-hand path from the start. You're going to face one of the Dreadborn Seers. You're going to face a pack of 2 Eridar Chaos Bringers and a Wrathguard. Then you're going to drop down to the left of the staircase, land on top of a pack of Wormtongue Scavengers, so you'll need to deal with those as well. And then you'll deal with a pack of 3 casters. The casters with the 3 pack of casters is actually probably one of the more difficult pulls in the dungeon, just because there's so many interrupts required. But as long as your group is on the ball and you've got a few AoE stuns and silences and things like that, particularly if you've got a few Blood Elves, you'll probably be fine. Just make sure to be prepared for anything that could go wrong in this pack. After that, you're done. That's the only difference for the left-hand path. It is a little bit of a longer path in some cases because there isn't quite as many opportunities for skipping mobs on the left, but it's more than fine and you shouldn't really have a problem timing the dungeon regardless of which direction you take. Back to the last boss. The main thing to watch out for on this guy throughout the fight is Accelerating Blast. It does a large amount of damage, magical damage, and leaves a buff on him, so you want to make sure to interrupt this as often as possible. If it does get off, a mage or a shaman or a priest can remove it from him. Next ability for your group to deal with is Force Bomb. He'll spawn 2 orbs somewhere in the area. After a short delay, they'll send out knockback waves, which will push you away from where they started. They don't do too much damage to you, hit the group pretty hard. Just make sure you run against them and get through them as quickly as possible. This is a good opportunity to save your own interrupt for, because you want to make sure you'll be moving the boss out of these waves as soon as possible. Throughout the fight, these little floating Geode Crystals will spawn. They spawn in groups of 3. After they spawn, they'll pulse a few times and then explode for big damage. Make sure you keep moving the boss away from these throughout the fight to make sure you can keep your melee DPS safe. At 50%, he'll stop the fight and cast Banish in time, which will send you somewhere else in the instance, and you'll have to run back to where he is. When he teleports you, you can be sent to any of the 4 boss rooms. There's only one path back in each case, or one quickest path. These are the paths that you'll need to take for each spot. The patrolling arcane elementals spread along the path back to the boss only have 2 abilities. When you first engage them, they'll do an ability called Time Stop, which will freeze whoever's targeted, or stun them rather. And while you're fighting them, they'll pulse arcane damage to everyone in the group. You just need to kill them as quickly as possible and move on. Once you get back to the boss, the fight continues as before. It's exactly the same. The only small difference that you need to deal with is an ability called Unstable Mana, which will target a random member of the group and pulse arcane damage underneath them. Just make sure you don't accidentally walk into this yourself. It doesn't target you, but it can still kill you if you happen to run over where a DPS is kiting it. That's all there is to this boss, and that's all there is to the Arcway dungeon. This was a bit of a long slog to get through it. There's a lot to talk about in Arcway, as you've just seen, and I hope this has given you a little bit more confidence in understanding the way the dungeon works. I hope this has given you the confidence to go out and jump into an Arcway while being confident that you can not only deal with all of the mechanics in the dungeon, but also potentially explain them to everyone in the group. As always, leave a comment if you think I've missed something, and I'll make sure that it gets visibility when people are looking at the channel. And I hope you guys have a fantastic time out there. Thank you very much.